add to it, take away, and I did that this last week, and I was praying and asking the Lord to help me, and it changed completely. I had an idea in my mind, and I was praying about it, and I went through and started changing things, and I sat down, I think it was Thursday night, and just rewrote everything, and I didn't even look up until it was done. And I'm not going to lie, I looked up and I didn't even read over my notes. I turned off my iPad and I prayed and asked the Lord if this is what He wanted me to bring. And as I'm sure, Brother John, you know, once you start to teach or you want to bring a message or anything, you read over it, you go over it, and I read over it, and I didn't like it. I still don't like it. It felt like I took all of the meat out of the lesson that I wanted to bring, but the Lord laid on my heart this is what I needed to bring, and He showed me I took out the filler, and I left what He wanted me to bring. So today I want to talk to you and share with you my testimony. As a lot of you guys know, I made a false profession. I believe I was 15, 16, I can't quite remember, but I want to share with you my testimony since then and how the Lord showed that to me and that I had made a false profession. I kind of already knew it, even very shortly after I had made a false profession, but pride got in the way, and I continued to lie to myself. And I want to show you what the Lord, the verses that He brought to my mind, all the verses that I'm going to use today, every single one of us here know them and probably have them memorized, and that's a point I want to bring out later in the lesson. I was going over this and talking to Amanda about it, and told her this Sunday school lesson is brought to you in part by ACE, because every single one of these is either a memory verse or something that we had, and I want to talk about that later. But starting out with a story, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it was before the Lord saved me, quite a while before the Lord saved me. I won't tell you what I was doing, but I was in the midst of a sin. I'm not going to go into quite detail. It was nothing gross, nothing over the top, but I was sitting there, and I had the thought, what if the Lord came back right now? I made a profession. I was telling everybody that I was a child of the King, but I wasn't living it. What if the Lord came back right now and found me in the midst of this? And very quickly, I shoved that thought down. I continued, and I went on with my life. Later, that same day, this verse, Matthew chapter 26, a lot of us know the context of this verse or this chapter. I won't read the entire thing just for time, but we know the context of this verse. When the Lord I remembered this verse, I'm not going to lie, I didn't know the context. I could not remember the context to save my life, but I just remembered verse number 41. We all know this. This is when the disciples, or Jesus went up to pray in the garden and asked His disciples to stay up and pray with Him, or to be with Him. And in verse, we'll read just 40 and 41. The Bible says, "And He cometh unto the disciples, and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, What could ye not watch with me 1 hour?" And then this is the verse, number 41 is the verse that I just remembered that day after pushing down what I was doing and ignoring it. Verse number 41, "Watch ye and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Like I said, at this point in time, I just remembered this one verse. I did not remember the whole context of this story. It was just this one verse that came to my mind. And that day, it started to bother me that it didn't bother me. And I told myself that day, well, I'm backslidden. I'm not where I needed to be. If I was truly watching and praying as I should, maybe my conscience wouldn't be seared towards sin, and I just pushed it away once again. I told myself, I'm not where I need to be. I'm falling into temptation. If I watch and pray, I'll do better tomorrow. And I kept telling myself that, and let's see. And then time went on, and another verse came to my mind, and that is Hebrews chapter 12 and verse number 1. And this goes along with the same idea as in Matthew 26. Another verse that I'm pretty sure was a memory verse back in ACE. Hebrews 12 verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. This verse came to mind. Once again, I thought, this is my problem. This is what's wrong. I am saved. And I will tell you, we'll get into this later, I kept telling myself I'm saved. I did not have the assurance. I did not have assurance. I was telling myself that I'm okay. If I just if I just set aside the weight and the sin that I keep falling into, I'll be fine. If you notice, it gets into a pattern of, I can take care of this. I can do this. I can handle my sin. And it really, at this point, once I remembered this verse, like I said, I was trying to deal with things on my own, and I started getting frustrated. I really became frustrated, and I started at this point to say, well, it's not my fault, If the school that I grew up in or the church that I went to, if they would have talked about these sins, if they would have talked about them more and would have really had a one-on-one conversation about each one of these sins, maybe I wouldn't have fallen into it in the first place. It's not my fault. And then yet another extremely familiar verse is 1 Thessalonians 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 22. This verse really, I'm not going to lie, it's still a very convicting verse, because I was thinking, even with that story that I started out with on, I was sitting there in the midst of sin in my life, and I just told myself, I've seen other Christians do this. The sin that I was doing that day where the Lord showed me He could come back at any time, I had seen Christians doing the exact same thing. And then I started to think, it's my family's fault. And then I started to make excuses. I said, well, the Bible really doesn't touch on that. This is a gray area. The Bible doesn't come out and say that this is wrong. And so I started to feel better about myself. I started to think, I'm okay. All right, this is a gray area. Some Christians will find this wrong, some won't. I know people who don't. I'm fine. And then I remembered this verse. 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Very simple verse that we all know. Abstain from all appearances of evil. Like I said, this is not a deep Sunday school lesson, but this is just what the Lord showed me. Abstain from all appearances of evil. There's no room for error in this verse. And it showed me, and something that I still struggle with to this day, if you don't know, it is better, go safer than not. If there's a gray area, be safe, don't tote the line. There's no reason to. And I've heard this preached and it never sank in until here lately. One day we're going to stand before the Lord, and this is not in my notes, but one day we're going to stand before the Lord, and I would rather be on the safe side than have done something that I regret. And I have all these notes written out, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not even reading them, and I'm just flying through this. So I have this whole next part in italics. If I had time, I was going to talk about it, but just for a little bit more insight to what was going through my head and my thought process at this point in my life. As I've already said, I was very bitter towards the schooling that I had and the church and family. I felt like they they didn't talk to me enough, which we know that's not true. That was an excuse that I had made up in my own mind. I was just trying to tote the line. I did not, like I said, I did not like this verse, abstain from all appearances of evil. I could not stand this verse because anytime that I did something wrong, this popped up in my head. This verse just ate away at me. And then I would go to work. And, people would ask me and they would notice, hey, you don't cuss. You don't laugh when a dirty joke is told, and you don't talk about different things that we talk about. You don't do the same things we do, and you talk about going to church. And people would ask me, they would say, Josh, clearly, you grew up in church, you talk about it, but where do you stand on that? Where do you stand spiritually? And I'm going to read verbatim, because this is every time somebody would ask me that. Every single time. And through this time, I went from working in electric to working at Pella to then, I think that was it, Nathan's Detailing to electric to Nathan's Detailing to Pella. So I came in contact with a lot of people. No, no, that's not right. It would have been here. Yeah, my story. Sorry, I'm nervous. But people would ask me this question of, where do you stand spiritually? And my answer was always, well, I'm a theist. I'm a theist. I believe there's a God. I understand that there's a God. So you guys know there's atheist, which means you don't believe in a God at all. You take the A off, that means you do believe there's a God. And that's where I fell. I said, I believe there's a God. I believe you're stupid if you believe in the Big Bang. I don't believe in evolution. I think that's wrong. But then I would always end with, but I do believe in science, because I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to seem like I was crazy, like I was just one of those Bible thumpers who they say, oh, creation's the end-all, be-all. And I would have never admitted it to anybody in church or even to coworkers. And to be honest, I don't even know if I realized this myself at the time, but looking back, this is definitely what I was doing. I always thought, if I could fit God into science a little bit more, I would strengthen my faith. I would have that much more faith if I could explain away how creation really worked in my own mind to science. And I know that's completely backwards from what it needed to be, but that's what I was thinking at that time. And clearly, by what I said to these people, that's the way I felt. I realized, and it started to convict me once again, I was just saying those things to make myself feel warm and fuzzy. Hey, I brought up God. I brought him up. So that kind of made me feel better. I at least said, hey, I'm not a theist. I believe there's a God. But one thing I never said was I was saved. I never said, I am a child of God, and let me tell you about it. I never did any of that. People asked me, they noticed. I could have been a witness, but all I said was, yeah, I'm not a theist. I believe in God. And then a couple other verses that came to my mind in this time was Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 33. And man, I thought I did not like 1 Thessalonians 5:22. I don't remember who was preaching. I believe it was Paul Wayne. I could not tell you when or where. Well, I could. I think I was listening to one of Paul Wayne's messages, because going through all of this, a lot of the times I would feel guilty about my sin and my stance before God. And again, to make myself feel all warm and fuzzy, I would listen to the Bible on my phone. I never really sat down and read the Bible. I would just listen to it, and I would turn my brain off and be somewhere else. But I felt better that I listened to a couple of chapters. And I was doing the same with messages. I would listen to anybody and everybody's message just to say I did it and to make myself feel better. But I believe as Papa Wayne was preaching, and he came across this verse, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 33. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Again, at this time, context, I couldn't tell you anything, but this verse came to my mind after Papa Wayne read it, and I couldn't get away from it, because that's exactly what I was doing at work. I brought up God, but I didn't say which God. They didn't know. And I definitely didn't claim him as my own. I was ashamed of God. I really was. I did not say he was mine. I didn't say I was a child of the King. And then another verse that ate away at me the same way. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. And again, I was toting that line during all this time. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. And these two verses, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 33 and Matthew 6 and verse 24, these were I will say this was the starting point of me saying there is nothing I can do. This is what I was doing. I knew I was ashamed of God. I didn't admit to anything. I wasn't saved, but I was embarrassed by it. And this was the starting point of realizing something's wrong, and me abstaining from sin is not the answer. I was lost and stopped, trying to stay away from sin. It's a good thing, and everybody should do it. But even if I had a streak, we all have those sins that so easily beset us. Even if I abstained from those for a week at a time, I didn't feel any better. I knew something was still wrong. I hadn't yet admitted it, but I knew something was wrong. And then the day came. Let's turn to Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3. Like I said, every now and then, I would just I'd feel guilty, and to get away from that guilt, I would listen to a couple of chapters in the Bible, and this so happened to come on the day home. Me and Amanda were driving home from Ohio, and Amanda had her earbuds in, sitting in the passenger seat, watching Netflix, and for, I would say, probably 60, 70 miles, I said complete silence. And I was struggling with this, and like I said, my answer at the time was, I'm just going to listen to some Bible verses. I'm going to make myself feel better, so that's what I did. I put my earbuds in, and for some reason, I picked Romans. I grew up in church, but for some reason I picked Romans. And I started at Romans chapter 1, and I listened to all the way to Romans chapter 3. And I was driving, I wasn't paying attention. Time had passed, and by the time I started paying attention, it was about verse 10. It was a little bit before that, but this is really when I couldn't escape it. Romans chapter 3, and we'll start reading at verse number 10. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues have they used deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. I'm going to stop reading for a second right there. When I was listening to this, and I'm sure everybody's probably listened to their Bible on audio, and a lot of the times the guy was very monotone in the way he was talking through all of these verses, but when he was reading through this point, every syllable seemed to have emphasis on it when he was going from verse number 13 down to 18, because man, was it describing the way that I felt. Like I said, when people would ask me my feelings on spirituality and religion, verse number 14, I might not have been cussing, but I wasn't telling the truth. Or I was telling the truth. I wasn't. I was trying to serve both God and mammon, and it felt as if I was cursing God. I wasn't accepting Him, and I was trying to distance myself away from Him as far as I could, but still make myself feel warm and fuzzy. And then, verse number 16, destruction and misery are in their ways. I tried to push away sin, but man, I was still miserable. I was still miserable. And then verse number 18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. At that verse, light bulb went off, and I said, I'm guilty. I feel guilty of my sins, but it was a guilt of I didn't want to get caught. I knew they were wrong. My family would be ashamed if they knew. I realized I'm sitting before Almighty God, and that was the difference. I didn't care. I didn't care about my stance before God, if you will. I cared about not getting caught. I didn't want to make my family and my friends ashamed. And then let's keep reading. Verse number 19. Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all them that believe. For there is no difference, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. these verses, they were familiar to me. Everybody knows verse 23. But verse 22, man, I listened to these verses, and the guy was reading them. It felt like, from going from verse 10 down to verse 23, it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. But man, it felt like forever. Because in that time, it was all, the Lord was just putting it together. There's nothing I could do with my sin. There's nothing at all I could do with my sin. I was trying, but there's nothing I could do. And then in verse 22, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe, there is no difference. This kind of clicked. Nothing I can do. And I almost had the exact same thought as my dad. I'm going to believe in you. Lord, I'm going to believe in you because that's all I can do. I can't do it on my own. There's nothing I can do. I need you. And right then and there, Lord saved me. And I try not to cry because I got a little bit more to get through. But the Lord saved me. And I could go through all of that, and I could spend a whole nother 30 minutes talking about just that feeling and the way that my life changed. And I have probably another 3 paragraphs on that, but I don't have a lot of time left. Try to skip ahead here. And from that moment, in context to what I was talking about and the way that the Lord used my sin to show me I was as filthy rag and there's nothing I can do with it except through Him. I want to show you the contrast of what happened after the Lord saved me. I still struggle with sin. But I have a different motivation. It's more than I don't want to get caught. And like in what was it, Matthew chapter 10 or Matthew chapter 26. Or sorry, no, I didn't even read the verse. But I still struggle. But now, I've got that. Let's see. I'm going to go back and read it. I skipped over this. I'm going to go back and read it. Did I read 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5? I don't remember. But going to now. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. I remember the feeling of going from not having any assurance whatsoever to, man, if I sinned, it was different. I can't explain it, but it was different, and I hated the feeling. And I knew that I sinned before God, and I wanted to make it right. There was no more, I shouldn't say there was no more, but my conscience when I was lost was seared against sin. And God showed me how He washed it away. I'm no longer guilty. But you don't want to sin when you're saved. Like verse 17 of 2 Corinthians chapter 5 says, you're new. But I want to finish with this thought, just because when I was going over this, like I said, I was kind of ashamed of this Sunday school lesson because it felt like it was really simple, and it was a lot of verses that we had heard before, we all knew. But as I said right there in the middle, the people that I was mad at when I was lost, my family, the church, the schools, you know what? They're the ones that had me memorize these verses. They're the ones who taught me these verses. You know, the Lord used these verses and brought them back to my mind when I needed them. And this has nothing to do with it, with my devotion, but another verse that really shines true in this. I'm sorry, I did not bookmark. I had so many verses that I still wanted to read that I didn't, but in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. This is now, after this and my testimony and the Lord showing me, He brought these verses back to my mind. I might have not remembered the context, but the Lord still used them. And I guarantee you, Sierra, Jasmine, you probably have heard these verses through school, and you will continue to hear them through school. And devotions that Papa Wayne gave, and Aunt Ty, and others, they used these verses and ingrained them in my mind to a point that the Lord could use them. And now, as I am saved, the Lord still uses these verses, but we know this verse too, 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. You know, I used a lot of these verses, and I talked to you about how the way the Lord used them and my thought process as a lost man, and the Lord still used them. But you know what, today? I didn't know the context then. Honestly, I couldn't have taught with them. I could not have taken that first verse, Matthew chapter 26, and I could not have told you the story behind it. I could not have even taught a lesson on it, and I don't feel like I'm ready yet. But I have the desire to go back and learn that context. I want to have a deeper understanding of the Word. I want to be able to expound upon these thoughts and the verses that the Lord used. I want to study to show myself approved. And that's my last point. The Lord changed my desires. Not only did He change my thought process on sin, He changed my process of, when I'm feeling guilty, go to Him and ask for forgiveness, to have a closer walk with Him, and to read my Bible as a daily, not just when I feel guilty. The Lord changed a lot in my life, and He's continuing to. And, it feels weird, right? I made a false profession of faith, and even at Independence, I brought devotions, and it felt like I was much more put together and had my thoughts right. And now that I'm saved, it feels like I don't even understand that much more of the Bible. But the Lord's given me the desire. And I ask for your prayers that, the Lord would continue in that, and I would use this to be a witness to family and friends, and that I would be a witness in a lighthouse. But that's all I got this morning. I appreciate your willingness to let me teach and the opportunity and to sit there and listen. I know it's probably been rough and choppy, but this is what the Lord laid on my heart. So I'm going to go ahead and end in prayer.